Hi, I'm Amanda, and I'm the community coordinator here at Semgrep. And with me today is Sachi. Sachi, can you introduce yourself?
Definitely. Thanks for having me, Amanda. I'm Sachi. I'm the head of product at Semgrep. I've been with the company for a little over a year. So I oversee the product management function at the company, which involves spending a lot of time with our customers, thinking about our company strategy and collaborating with our founders and other leaders on essentially what we should build in the product to make sure we're delivering maximal value to our customers.
So, before moving to security, you worked in observability. Why did you make this move, and what are some of the similarities and differences?
Great question. So before I joined Semgrep, I spent several years at Lightstep, which is an observability company, really focused on ensuring that the software that you're using in your daily lives is extremely reliable. So at Lightstep, I was spending a lot of time, of course, with our users back then, which were site reliability engineers, right? SRE teams. And when I started learning and like looking into Semgrep, one of the things that really got me excited was actually the similarities between what product would mean at an observability company and at a security company. So one of the big similarities is when I was at Lightstep, like I mentioned, I was working a lot with SRE teams, right? So with the product, you had to make sure that SRE teams could actually manage and uphold the reliability of that product to a certain standard. But you're also working with kind of a second use set of users, which was the developers at the company, because ultimately for an SRE function to really scale, you have to make sure that your developers, as they're like building code, and the people who are like the most familiar with the services that they might be working on are actually able to also contribute to the reliability of the app. And unless you're able to kind of like also build a product that's compelling to the users of your primary users, which are the developers, it's really, really hard to make sure that your customers ultimately are hitting all of their goals. And the thing with security or application security is that it's extremely similar in this regard. So a lot of my day-to-day is spent like with working with application security engineers, but also making sure that our product is compelling enough and easy enough to use for a developer at the company as well. Because if like all of security is in the hands within AppSec, that is just an extremely ambitious and almost impossible task to take on. I think as the company grows, especially if you're a cloud native company with like highly distributed systems, you need to make sure that the engineers who are working on that part of the app and who know it best can help make sure that that part of the app is also reliable and also secure, right? So I think like this like dual pronged approach of like thinking about two different audiences, I find particularly exciting, and definitely one of the big similarities between working within observability and working within security. I think another thing that is similar is that, I started my career as an engineer, and one of the things you have to do in an engineering role or a product role, and similar to what our users are probably thinking of, is how do you balance feature velocity with things like reliability and security, right? So how do you find like the right metrics to use to actually make those kinds of like decisions as to, am I underinvested in security? Is my app secure enough? Is my app reliable enough? Am I actually moving a little bit like too slowly for the business needs of the organization as well? Am I moving fast enough? Am I in a healthy spot? So I think with SRE teams, over the last decade, there's been a lot of work on like these standardizations and metrics, things like SLOs, error budgets, burn rates, that lets you actually look service by service and understand if your reliability is kind of like good enough for right now. With application security, this is something I think like the organizations and companies are still very much working on, and we don't have that same level of like standardization and metrics just yet, but it is something that I'm very, very excited about. And how do you communicate to companies whether the security is like up to standard or not?
So, what is it like to lead a product team at a startup?
I think it is definitely a big part of the role is like wearing a lot of different hats, right? And especially when you're at a startup, the company is growing really fast. The kinds of companies that you're taking on as customers can also change a lot. So ultimately, I think prioritization is really, really name of the game. You can't spread yourself too thin. You have to be very, very focused on like, is the product that you're building and the features that you're putting out there, the use cases that you're developing, really what your customers of today and your customers of tomorrow need the most? Is it aligned with the vision of the company that the founders of the company have? And yeah, I think like, the failure mode that I see a lot of companies going into is like you try to target like too many different kinds of like audiences all at the same time, and you don't have that ultimately ruthless prioritization that's needed. A big part of it is like, going back to earlier point about like reliability and security, you also have to make sure that the workflows in your product are like well-rounded. And it's kind of a balance of like velocity versus also just kind of like completeness of the product and making sure the product is super, super simple to use for AppSec teams as well as end users. So a lot of it is like prioritization and also like helping the product managers on the team really understand like what the vision of the company and like what the overall product strategy is. So then they're able to make those more granular prioritization decisions themselves as well.
What are some of the attributes you look for in a product manager?
Good question. I think a few things. At the top of my list would be empathy. I think it's really important for a product manager to understand not just what users are asking for at like a surface level, but also like dig deep and understand the true problem that users are really facing, and also have empathy enough to put themselves in the shoes of the user. I think when you're able to do that, you can often design, like you truly understand the problem. You're often able to kind of work with others to design like the best possible solutions to tackle that problem. Empathy, I think, is also a really interesting skill because or quality for a product manager to have, because on any given day, you're working with so many functions. You spend a lot of time with engineering and design. You spend a good amount of time with like sales and marketing, beyond speaking, of course, to users, and being able to understand like where each of those cross-functional counterparts are also coming from is extremely important in the job. So empathy would be at the top of my list. The second thing I look for is decisiveness. I think ultimately a lot of teams, turn to the product leader on the team to help drive towards a decision, especially, when there's a lot of like competing priorities and things like that. Of course, at a startup, but I'm sure at like most companies in general. And I always say that, with decisiveness, I think like the ability to make quick decisions is of course important, but you should also be able to like measure the success of those decisions, right? And if something is like a two-way door, or it's easy to kind of like course correct along the way based on, response from users, or maybe like metrics that you're looking at, I'd much rather that we're decisive, intentional, but like decisive, make the decision, and then kind of like fine tune it to kind of like truly achieve the outcomes after that. So decisiveness, I think, would be the second piece that I look for in product managers. And maybe if I could add a third, I would say curiosity, because there's always like so much to learn about, whether it's like within your own industries or in different industries, and just like very much goes hand in hand with empathy, but having an open mind, asking users good questions, thinking about like what new products or new markets could we go after is always a great skill to have as a PM.
What would you say is your favorite part of the job?
It's definitely the people I work with and the many hats that you can wear. So I think in any given day, I'm thinking about at least like 6, 7, maybe like 9 or 10 completely different problems. And working with like, of course, right now I'm spending time with you on community, but just today alone, I've spent time with engineering, design, marketing, a lot of different functions. So I think just kind of being able to stretch myself in so many different ways, think about a whole variety of problems, and not just kind of like go deep on one thing is like super, super interesting to me. But, of course and like definitely one of my favorite parts of the job, but of course, like sometimes you need that heads down time to just like go super deep on one thing as well.
One last question for you. What advice would you give to someone who wants to one day become a product owner?
Great question. I think a few things on this one. I think if you want to become a product owner, I think the first thing is to think about like what kind of product or what kind of industry you would want to work in. And one thing to keep in mind is like as a PM, you have to live and breathe the product, right? So it's extremely beneficial to either be super passionate about the product you're working on or have some kind of like unique insight about the product that you'd want to work on or the industry that you'd want to work in, or ideally have worked in that industry before. So, for example, I started my career as an engineer, and that's been really helpful in working within observability as well as within security, because I'm able to like understand these spaces and kind of like empathize a little bit more with the users that we have, right? So I'd say like step number one and my first piece of advice is to find kind of like an industry or a product that you're super passionate about or have like deep knowledge in already. The second thing that I would say is spend time with the users of the product, and as much as you can to really understand like what are the pain points that they might have, and that could ultimately help you identify like quick wins as well as like opportunities to make more sweeping changes, I think, to the product offering as well. And I think a third piece of advice is I've often seen product managers do exceedingly well when they've worked typically within like either within like engineering or like a go-to-market function prior to moving into product, because if you have a deeper knowledge of like either how the technology is built or how you would like actually take the piece of technology to market, I think it can really help make that transition internally within a company or potentially at another related company as well, to move from like a role like engineering or sales or customer success eventually into product management.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Sachi.
Thank you.